Water-soluble graphite? Heck yeah. Have you been wanting to play around with water-soluble graphite? Well, that's what we're going to do today. Hi, my name is Shanna Rowe Jackson, also known as Caution Artist at Play, because I love to play with all different kinds of art supplies. And today we are going to be playing around with the Graphite Aquarelle by Faber-Castell. This is their 5 set of water-soluble pencils. I'm just going to take them into the sketchbook and draw a fun succulent with them. And I will be talking a lot about the different properties of water-soluble graphite in general, and kind of how these compare to other water-soluble graphite that I've used in the past. This is not meant to be a step-by-step tutorial, but I will be going over some of my favorite water-soluble techniques. So let's get the sketchbook, let's get down to it. We're gonna start drawing. I have here the 5 set of Graphite Aquarelle by Faber-Castell. As you can see, there is an HB, a 2B, a 4B, a 6B, and an 8B. Very beautiful octagonal barrel, and it has the little paintbrush there showing that it is a water-soluble product. Now, this video is not sponsored by Faber-Castell. I bought these on my own a while back so that I could review them or play around with them and add them to my water-soluble graphite collection. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to swatch them, and I am swatching them in 3 different ways. The first column all the way to the right, I am just swatching them dry, just like I would a regular graphite pencil, with a little bit of a gradient there, using more pressure to get a darker kind of saturation, and then lighter pressure to get the lighter saturation. Then the second middle column, I am adding water to the pencil directly on the paper. And then for the third column, all the way to the left, I am using the graphite that I have lifted it with my brush from a palette. So I am taking my pencil and scribbling it on a plastic palette, and then I'm taking water on my brush and lifting it from the palette and bringing it over to the paper. I wanted to kind of get an idea of the full value range that I could get while using it in different ways. Then I'm just coming through with various erasers and seeing how well they erase once they're dry. The black one that looks like a pen is a Factus BM2 mechanical eraser, and the other one that I use is the Faber-Castell Perfection Eraser. It sharpens like a pencil, both great for detail. Now I'm coming in to my drawing. I have a very simple sketch here done of a succulent. I thought this would be a good subject because there's a lot of different shading. I wanted to be able to get a good idea of how many values I can get out of this set. Now, this is a predominantly soft set, so of course, a lot of the values are going to be darker. Now, something about water-soluble graphite to keep in mind is that it can get dark fairly quickly. So you always want to keep in mind where your highlights are and do your best to preserve them. When you are working in your lightest areas, you want to work very, very light at first and then darken it up as it goes along. Very similar to working with watercolor. You want to work light to dark, because once you get dark, it can get really, really hard to lift and get back to that perfect white. So I'm keeping that in mind as I go. Water-soluble graphite tends to be fairly permanent once it's washed out with water. It's harder to lift than a lot of other water-soluble media is. Sometimes with water-soluble graphite, it can actually just be easier to let things dry and lift things with an eraser than lifting it while it's still wet like you would with a regular watercolor. So if you are struggling with an area and you have some adjustments you want to make, I suggest to let it dry and then try to lift it with an eraser and then go from there. But that makes it fantastic for layering. So it's easy to work light to dark because you can do your lighter washes and then come over and darken it up gradually, because you don't have to worry about the layers lifting from below. Now, something else to keep in mind is that this is graphite, so there is going to be some glare. I feel like these have a little bit more glare than other water-soluble graphite that I have used. Now, that being said, because it's a graphite product, you kind of expect that to begin with, but when I've worked with the Art Graph or the Derwent pencils that are also water-soluble graphite, I have noticed that after they're washed out completely with water, they tend to be a lot more matte than regular graphite, whereas these pencils, I've noticed a lot more glare than I get with those other brands. That's just my personal experience, just an observation. It's not a bad thing. You know, you expect graphite to have some glare, but it's just something that I've noticed. As far as blending these out, I've also noticed that they are a little bit more painterly than the other brands I've used. It could be the paper that I'm working on. I am working in my Jane Davenport art journal. It's a watercolor art journal. And so this isn't going to be the biggest, highest end paper. I usually work on the Strathmore 400 series mixed media paper, and that has a nice smooth texture for the water-soluble graphite and a little bit more weight to it than this paper. So part of my issues with blending could have to do with the paper. But I noticed that these didn't blend out as smoothly as what I'm used to working with. That being said, they are beautiful pencils, and you can get the fun dark darks with them if that's what you're going for. Again, I chose this reference because it has a lot of high contrast. I wanted to go as dark as I possibly could and also reserve the whites of the highest highlights. I wanted to have that full value range in this piece. And it doesn't show up as well in the video as it does in the scan or even in person because there is going to be that glare. So it's much harder to see all the subtle value shifts in this video. So I apologize for that. I tried to adjust my lighting as much as possible because I noticed partway through that those darks were really glaring. Now, as far as my working routine with water-soluble graphite, it's very similar to how I work with other water-soluble pencils. You've seen me work with the Derwent Inktense a lot on this channel and even the Derwent Graphitint. And basically, I like to start off loose and tighten things up as I go along. I start off with lighter washes and I will go through and bring the details in with just the pencil dry later on. Now, some of the areas that I know are going to be dark, I am going to start off with my darker pencil because I know that it's going to be very, very dark there. But again, I'm usually starting off with like a 4B or 6B. I don't typically jump to the 8B until I'm at the point where I want to have my darkest darks. So even in those darkest areas in the center of the succulent, I'm usually in the 6B, 4B range. And another thing that I like to do with my other water-soluble pencils that you may see me doing here is I will let the line do the work for me. So you'll see me kind of outline these darker areas first, and then use the water to blend that line out and create a wash over the other areas of the parts that I am working on. So I did a lot of that in the center of the succulent. While I was working on this, I was very much keeping in mind all the different shifts in value and the shapes, like the fatty parts of this succulent, and trying to keep in mind that there are some angles, but there's also some rounder edges, and I really wanted to make sure that when I was shifting edges and when I was really like trying to go from value to value, that I was paying attention to my soft lines and then my harder lines, or my softer edges and my harder edges. If I wanted something to feel fatty and succulent-like, you know how you can kind of squish the succulent? I don't know if you have succulents, but I love succulents and I like to I don't know, they're kind of mushy. But anyway, I was going to use my softer edges for the blending within the pieces of succulent themselves. And then the outer edges of those chunks are where I had my harder edges, especially where those dark shadows were going to be. And sometimes I did a little bit of blending with the pencil itself. And I came in a lot just using Q-tips and a blending stump. Once the graphite was washed out and dried, I was able to continue blending the same way that I would with a regular graphite pencil. So I would come in with a blending stump and blend things out further, especially in the places that got a little wishy-washy with the brush. And I am using a Holbein Gold synthetic brush in a round, I think either a size 6 or 8. And that's what I'm using for most of it, but it holds a lot of water, and there are times when that could be a little bit more difficult when I was trying to get a smooth blend because it was making it more watercolory. So something else to keep in mind when you're working with water-soluble graphite is your control over the amount of water you're using. Now I'm coming in with my pencils and adding those fun details. There's always a little bit of soil and spots and things like that on the succulent, and I'm just adding that to bring things together. Here is what the finished piece looks like all scanned in. I had a ton of fun with this. It was great to just play around with some graphite in my sketchbook again. I did enjoy working with these pencils, and I think they're going to be a great addition to my water-soluble graphite stash, and I look forward to using them more in the future. If you like this piece, I do have prints available on my print site. I will put a link for that in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed myself, and I hope that you did too. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing so that you can see more like it. And if you really like graphite, check this one out next.